sessions are being recorded, so we will be able to send those recordings. And it is now 11:30, so a very warm welcome back to the Institute of Health and Social Care Management Conference. And today, in this session, we are going to discuss and address underperformance. And I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to Sonia Rai from Nectar HR. Now, Nectar HR are one of our corporate partners, and you might not be aware, but the IHSCM members do have access to one free HR support about 1 hour's free HR support advice. So please do use this very valuable resource. So I am going to pass you over to Sonia.
Thank you so much, Sue. Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be back with the IHSCM. We've run quite a few webinars over the course of this year and last year. So it's nice to be back with you all virtually. So this morning, and just moving into just after lunch, we're going to be going through two scenario-based questions, and then I'm going to be giving you some key points around critical conversations, poor performance, disciplinary, the really fun side of HR and people management. I can see my screen as I'm presenting, but I think Sue might have said earlier, if you want to introduce yourselves, if you've got a specific question, you can pop it in the chat and then Sue will pick that up. I'm happy to, answer any questions that you have as we're going along. So as Sue said, my name is Sonia Rai. I'm the founder and director of Nectar HR. We are a partner, HR partner with the Institute. If you can, connect with us on LinkedIn, on our social media, we do lots of updates, videos, those kind of things, hopefully things that you find really, really useful. So let's move into our first scenario. So we've got a scenario here where we have a carer who's recently been promoted to a supervisor, but the registered managers received complaints from carers in the supervisor's team around their behaviour towards the carers. So examples could be like the tone of voice, lack of consistency of how they're dealing with the team, and it's having an effect on the care team. They feel demoted and unappreciated. The registered manager thinks it's a performance issue and is looking to have a meeting with the carer. So I'm going to try and go through, hopefully, what I feel is quite a comprehensive step-by-step process of normally what we would do in this situation if a client came to us with something like this. But I'm going to try and not put too much of a HR spin on it. I'm going to try and talk about, as a manager, what should you be doing? So first of all, don't jump to any kind of conclusions about anyone feeling demotivated or unappreciated straight away. I know you've had some carers that have come to you and said some things, but don't let that necessarily lead you too much. So don't jump to conclusions necessarily about how the team are feeling right at that minute. You may have had one snapshot of a conversation with them, and don't jump to a conclusion that this is a performance issue with the carer who's been promoted to a supervisor. It's always best to go into something like this with a very, very open mind, because often you will go through some steps and you will find out there's other information that you didn't know about, and it then starts shedding light on what this scenario looks like. So the first thing I would suggest you do is block some mutually free time in your diary between yourself and your supervisor and plan an informal conversation with them. So think about where you're going to have this conversation. Are you going to have it in your open plan office? Are you going to have it somewhere that's really busy, that isn't confidential? If so, I don't really think that that's going to be the best place for you to speak to somebody about this issue. What you need to do is you need to think about where you've got that is confidential, and you need to block out somewhere where, like we always talk about, spaces that are potentially a little bit open, or there's like glass windows and people can see what's going on. We have an office for one of our clients where it's a lovely meeting room, but it's all glass on one side, and every time somebody walks past, it's just it's just kind of, everybody just always has a little look in, and we would never ever hold a HR meeting in there just because of the tone of a conversation. Somebody might get upset. So, think about where you're going to have this meeting. If you've got a private office, great. Then you need to start planning the conversation. You can't just book the time out in your diary and meet with this person. You really need to think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and what you need to get from this conversation. So start planning what that looks like. So maybe start to think about evidence. Evidence is really, really important. If you don't have evidence, it's very difficult to approach a conversation with somebody, and I'll talk through that in a little bit more detail shortly. So plan what you're going to say, think about the evidence that you've got, the dates and times. Did you see this specifically? Is this something that you're hearing from one carer in the team specifically? Is it a wider issue, do you feel? And then when you're going into that meeting, have your notes and everything ready. So almost what we like to do with our clients is plan a draft script for them. So we'd be looking at putting a script together after getting a lot of information from the registered manager to put this together so that they can have this conversation. So we'd be looking at opening up the informal meeting with just, how are you? How are things? How are things going? So make a note of your opening, your date, your time of your meeting and where it is, and just a general, how are you? How are things going? Is everything okay with you? Then let them know that you've got some concerns that you would like to discuss with them informally at this stage. At this stage is really, really important, because your conversation may or may not mean that we need to move to a more formal process a little bit further down the line. So we're letting them know that this stage, at this moment, it's informal, but at this stage, this is all we're doing, but it may lead to something a little bit more formal. And then what we're going to do is we're going to present each concern alongside the evidence. So if I was to speak to any one of you on this call and wanted to speak to you about your lateness, and I said something very generic like, I've noticed you're always late, that's not really giving you a lot of information about when you're always late. And obviously when you say always, it implies all the time. So let's be specific. Let's think about the times. So it could be, I noticed that on last Friday, so the 11th of October, you came in at 9:45 and you're supposed to start at 9. Can you just tell me what happened? Because I noticed that you were late and you didn't ring me to let me know. It impacted this, and this. We had to move back a visit. Can you tell me what happened? So with this example, in this scenario, we've talked about tone of voice and we've talked about being different with different people in the team. Have we got some examples of that? Have we got examples of where this individual has authorised annual leave for one or two people, but then not authorised it for somebody else? Those are kind of things that we're talking about. If it's the tone of voice, have you witnessed it yourself? Or is it something that you've got a group of people coming to you and telling you? And then ask them in each case what's happened. So I just wanted to talk to you about this. So I noticed on last Friday, October the 11th, this happened. Tell me what happened. And leave time for that pause. So leave time for you to now step back. You've set the scene and you're now opening up the floor for them to say whatever it is that they need to say. Now, sometimes in meetings like this, it can become difficult because the person isn't expecting what you had to say, or they may be a little bit defensive. Now, what you want to try and do is get through that barrier, essentially. So you need to be open, you need to think about your own body language, and you need to show that you are engaged and listening to what they're saying. Now, if I think about when I'm really listening to somebody, what body language do I display? I'm normally, I'm not kind of sat like this, I'm quite open, I'm quite relaxed, I have eye contact, I might tilt my head, I am nodding, I might make some notes, I'm normally making notes, but I'm looking up and down and I'm genuinely engaged with what this person has to say. So, you've had a discussion, you're talking them through what's being said, what's come forward to you, and you've now asked them what's happened. Now they're going to say, I was late, this happened, and you're going to say, okay, right, I can appreciate that happened on the day and that was very unplanned, but I would have expected you to call me. I would have expected you to tell me that you're running late. I would need to know that you had a meeting at 9:15 that you weren't going to be available for, or you had a visit booked in at this time, or you were due on the rota to do X, Y, and Z. So after we've spoken through each one, we want to be talking them through what the expected behaviour is. And that is really important, because if you don't tell them, they might not actually realise. So once you've gone through your evidence, you've spoken to them about each point, we then say, right, Joe, given that happened on Friday, this is what I would have expected you to do. So can we put a plan together to ensure that this doesn't happen again? And so there we're mutually agreeing they are being accountable for a plan that they're going to come forward with. Discuss any support that they might require. So is there a training issue? Is it a flexibility issue? Is it that they've got some caring responsibilities at home and actually they just can't start until 10? Is there an issue in their personal life that's short term that's come up? And then you need to, talk to them about the fact that, look, whilst we're going to keep an eye on this and we've gone through this conversation, if this doesn't improve, I might need to consider more formal action. If this becomes a pattern, or if this is constantly repeated, I might need to look at this in a bit more detail because of the impact that it has on everybody else. And it's, just not meeting the expected standards that we have in our organisation. If you've got review periods, put in the meetings. So if you are reviewing that for a short period of time, they need to start at 10. You've agreed that for 3 weeks. You're going to meet on every Friday at 10:15 to see how they got on that week. Did they come in after 10? Were they in before 10? Do they still need it for the second week and the third week? Has something changed? Do they need it for longer? So make sure you agree your review periods and stick to those meetings. So put them in the diary there and then. Then check for their understanding. So make sure that they understand what you've said. And that might sound like a really silly point, but a lot of the time, you wouldn't believe how many times we've got involved in a conversation and somebody says, I didn't realise that that's what my manager was actually communicating to me. I thought it was this. And the manager's like, no, but we said this. So make sure you check for their full understanding and that they fully understand what you've agreed and what you've planned going forward. Then summarize the meeting. So, okay, I called you here today. We're having an informal chat. This is what we discussed. You told me this. I talked to you about why this wasn't acceptable, the impact that it has on our service, X, Y, Z. We've agreed to do this. You've agreed to do this. You said you wanted an update on this training. I've booked that. I'm going to go away and book that in for you. Summarize the meeting. Is that correct? Yes, that's all correct. And then write up a conversation, write up your conversation and pop it in their employee file as a file note and make sure you send them a copy. This part is so important because you may be the registered manager at this time. You may have had this conversation with this individual. And if you just had it verbally, nothing's been put down in writing, it can become very difficult to manage that plan. But also, if it happens again and you've had a verbal conversation, it's very difficult to refer to that if you want to pick up on it again. So for us as HR professionals, when we're coming into a situation sometimes a bit further down the line, if these conversations aren't documented and the registered manager might be saying to us, oh, but I've spoken to this person, I've told them this, I've told them that. Did you write anything down? Did you send them the notes? No, I didn't do any of that. And then you've got the employee saying, yeah, but that was just an informal conversation. I didn't have any follow-up in writing. There wasn't even a plan that was written down. And actually my manager agreed this, this, and this, and they didn't even do that training. They didn't even book that in for me. And then we have to almost start from scratch. And if you've got a pattern or a repeat situation going on here, we really need to just start as we mean to go on. So I would definitely ensure that you are writing up the full conversation and sending them a copy of the notes of the informal meeting. And then if you need to refer to it further down the line, great. We've also been in situations where we might have an employee where, you know, this might have happened with their line manager, it got sorted, and then the registered manager moves on for whatever reason, somebody new comes in, and we get repeat behaviour. And then what happens is we've got nothing to refer to, and this person might then raise a grievance and say, I'm being picked on by my manager, and they're saying this, that, and the other. And we've got nothing to show that this has actually been an ongoing issue. And all of the history and everything that happened with this individual has left with our registered manager. So we need to make sure that an employee file is very much a reflection of what's happening with an employee, be that an update, a salary change, requested the way that they work, all these kind of informal conversations where we need to pick something up with somebody. Now, the other thing to remember here is if this is becoming a difficult issue, it's not the first time you've had to speak to them, or they are displaying quite difficult behaviour in this meeting, and on going after this meeting, you may well need to take a more formal approach. They may disclose something to you in this meeting that, you know, the reason why I don't let that person have holidays is because of this, and it's a really kind of subjective reason, and you may have concerns about them as a supervisor. So then you do need to take it more formally. But, you know, as Sue and I were talking about just before, you know, we were getting ready to start this session, when we're dealing with people, it's never go this way, go this way, go this way. It's like a tree with many branches, and it can go off into so many different directions. So we may plan our initial process and step, but after that point, it could go off into lots of different directions.
Like a firework sometimes.
Yes. And I will, hopefully we'll get to it, and I'll try and go through some of that in some of the slides that we've got. So that's our first scenario.
I've just had a question in the chat, Sonia, just as we're on that page, and it's saying, what about if they deny the behaviour despite you stating the time and date it happened?
I think that you need to then, well, have you got witnesses? And how serious is the behaviour? So if they deny it, you can make a note of it if it's not too serious. If it is serious, then you might need to start an investigation.
Okay. It's also just added, or if they say the notes are wrong of the meeting, but again, I think that's about.
No, we deal with that one as well. So what we will say is, well, do you want to tell us what you thought was said? Because I made notes throughout the entire of the meeting. So do you want to tell me where you want to make amendments? So we'll look at the amendments that they've made. If we agree with them, great. If we don't agree with them, we then agree to have 2 copies on file. We do the same with any formal meeting as well. Okay. But sometimes, I mean, we do a lot of these meetings on Teams, so we will just record the meeting and we'll just get a transcript from it, which is actually a lot easier because they then can't, you know, disagree with what was said because it's a recording and it's there.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So let's move on to our second scenario. So we've got a care coordinator and they've received complaints from a customer's family about one of the carers. The customer is saying they think there is a safeguarding issue because the carer has left the customer, who is unable to walk unaided, in the bathroom on their own while she finishes off some tasks that she's been asked to do. So let's move on to how would we deal with this? So first of all, I would say, what does your complaints policy say? Obviously, I'm talking to you and giving you advice as kind of useful as I can make it, but I don't know what your contracts of employment say. I don't know what your own policies say, and they may well steer you in a very similar direction, but there might be something specific that you need to do. So the first thing I would do is look at your complaints policy. What do we say that we're going to do? What are the consequences of these allegations? Because at the moment they are allegations. Did somebody meet with an accident because of this? Is there any warnings on file with this carer? Have they been spoken to before about something like this? Is the carer on probation? Have they completed all of their required training? If not, why not? Do they have an up-to-date DBS? And then depending on how we answer those questions, and we would want to look at your contract of employment and your policies as well around this. We might need to do any one of the following, and these are just some potential options. So if there was a fall and it was serious, we might need to consider a suspension. But please take advice before you suspend somebody. I've seen lots of organisations that come to us and say, we've suspended somebody, this is what we're doing. And we take a look at the suspension letter and we're just like, oh my goodness, it's missing all the legal bits that we need from a suspension. Even if they've said that they've taken a template from somewhere, make sure you take expert HR advice before and do a risk assessment. So we do this for all of our clients when we're suspending somebody. We put together a risk assessment of why we need to suspend, what the risk is to colleagues, the people that we're looking after, any third party, when that risk might pass, and we need to keep that under review. Do we need to change duties of the carer temporarily just while we investigate the matter? So actually, yeah, we think that there might be some merit in this, or what we're going to do is we're not going to suspend you. We'd like you to come in, complete some training that you need to do, and do some work from our head office, or work from home and do X, Y, and Z. Speak to the employee informally about what happened to get an account of what happened, very similar to scenario 1, but perhaps not leaving it so long, like planning a mutually agreeable time. You're going to have to maybe move a few things around to speak to this person very, very quickly, because it's a potential safeguarding issue. Now let's speak to them, establish what they're saying, establish what happened, and then you're going to need to take a step back and think, okay, this is an issue with a continuous customer who is always making a similar complaint and X, Y, and Z. Or no, I think we're going to have to do a suspension, or we're going to have to do a temporary change of duties, or there is an issue between this carer and this customer. So I have no concerns about safeguarding, but I'm just going to move them off looking after that customer and doing X, Y, and Z. So you've got lots of options that are open to you. But then most likely you're going to need to investigate. That's what your complaints policy is going to say. If it does need to move forward into some kind of a disciplinary, you need a really fair, transparent, open investigation. I think we've done a session before, Sue, on investigations, and it might be one that we were going to pick up on again. But yeah, there's a whole process around investigating and investigating fairly. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea of what you would initially need to ask yourself in this kind of a scenario, and then potentially the different ways that it could go, because it might be really serious or it might not be. We just don't have enough information at the moment. Is that okay? I can see some comments have come up in the chat, Sue, but I can't see what they are. Am I all right to move on? Or
yes, yeah, I've asked the questions, so that's fine. Yeah.
Okay, great. I just wanted to talk a little bit about this issue here. So give me a second. I'm just moving a few things around on my screen so I can see everything. Sometimes a client will come to us and they will say it's a performance issue. And actually it's not, it's a misconduct issue. And sometimes I'll say it's a misconduct issue, and sometimes it's not, it's a performance issue. It can be difficult to tell sometimes. One of the key questions that we ask ourselves is, are the actions deliberate? So there is, what we ask is it can't do or is it won't do? So can't do is a performance issue, and I'll talk through that in a little bit about what we might do to support somebody in that situation. Won't do is, I know what's expected of me and I don't want to do it, or I just want to find a way around doing that, or but whatever the reason is. But have a look at your disciplinary policy, have a look at some of the examples that you give for misconduct and gross misconduct, and have a look at what your capability or performance policy is for. If you're unsure, again, speak to a professional, get a little bit of advice about the best way to deal with something. So if you have got some complaints that have come in, that might be raised by in the, the two scenarios that we've looked at, a customer or a colleague, you need to think about, is it genuine? Do I need to investigate? Even a small amount of investigation will shed some kind of light on a situation that you didn't know was there before. It's always very important to be discreet, think about confidentiality, and give everybody a chance to respond. Now, this is obviously if we're not moving into some kind of formal investigation. And by that, I mean a fact-finding investigation that could lead into some kind of a disciplinary sanction or some kind of performance sanction for somebody. If it was moving into that, then again, I'd get expert advice. But think about the facts that you've got in front of you. What are the facts do you need to be able to establish if something did or didn't happen? And always be mindful of cliques in teams as well. So, we've had cases before where we've had something raised against a manager, and it might be one or two people in a larger group. And then what we found is that there's just kind of different groups that are formed in this team. And you need to be mindful of that. Now, that's not to say that the allegations that have been raised have no merit. That's just to understand the dynamics and the culture of that team. And sometimes you need to be very mindful of that when you have got complaints and allegations being raised. So, when we're thinking about why we need to address performance issues early, I think, and even, misconduct issues, having a difficult conversation with somebody is not the first thing that when you ask a manager, what's your favorite thing about supporting a team or managing a team? That's definitely not top of the list. That's probably way bottom of the list. So it's something that, we have to all recognize that we probably don't always want to do, but we know we need to do it. And I thought it'd be interesting to just have a look at why we feel we need to. If we aren't dealing with an issue straight away or in its early phases, it's going to become harder to resolve it as we let it grow. It's going to snowball. It might impact on your wider team, their motivation. If I'm in a team and there's somebody that's being difficult or somebody whose tone is always a bit disrespectful or a bit rude, doesn't match the values of the organisation that I'm working for, and my manager just doesn't do anything about it, how am I going to feel about that? If they're always coming late on a Friday or they're always off sick and it's not being managed properly, no one's having a conversation with them, how is that going to make me feel as a team member? I'm going to think, I could do that. Or, I'm not appreciated. I'm not valued. I'm just a person that has to pick up after them. So there's so many factors that you have to consider, not just with that one individual where you've got the concern, but also your wider team. As memories fade, there'll be a dispute about he said, she said. So you need to be very mindful of having these conversations sooner rather than later. And if you don't deal with it in a timely manner, and then you pick up on it all of a sudden after a later point, sometimes people are very suspicious of that. I know a situation where somebody, they had lots of issues and small level concerns with an employee. They ignored them for a long, long time. They didn't do anything about them. The employee raised a grievance. The grievance was not upheld. The employee appealed the grievance. It was not upheld. But then they realised that we really need to start managing this employee. So they started. But the employee then claimed, well, you're only doing that because I raised a grievance. And of course, the issues were always there, but the client just didn't manage them at the right time. And I think just something to note is that if you don't intervene, the employee is not going to realise that there's an issue. So if you don't tell me that what I'm doing isn't quite correct or isn't meeting the values of the organisation, I'm not going to know. So be open and have those open conversations with people. There are quite a few barriers to success as well that, we might think, okay, didn't really think that that might impact somebody at work, but they might have something going on in their personal life. They might have a health issue for themselves or a member of their family. There might not actually be enough resource in the team, and it might be kind of unrealistic expectations that are being placed on people. They might be in the wrong job, or your recruitment process might have fallen foul of actually not assessing that they've got the right skills for the job. They might have a difficult relationship with colleagues. So there's just so many things that might be a barrier to success. And it's always really important to have conversations with people, because when you're asking those open questions that we were talking about in scenario 1, you might find that it's something that's on this screen that's actually impacting that. I'm very conscious of time. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to get through these. So how can you help and support? You could think about additional training. You could think about giving them additional time to do something. They might be in probation, so you might want to extend it. They might need some coaching. So, we talked about the first scenario where somebody was a carer and they got promoted to a supervisor. Were they giving any additional training about how to deal with their team, about how to deal with difficult situations? Do we need to look at some improved resources? Is the IT technology that we're using really out of date and lagging, and meaning that it takes people twice as long to do something? Have we got a vacancy in the team? Do you need some support from HR? Do they need to make a flexible working application? Have they got something that's come up that means that they can't commit to their start time, but they could commit to half an hour later? There's lots of things that you can do to try and support your employees if there is something going on that they do need support with. So some of the key points from today is be clear about what your expectations are. Where you can, as quickly as you can, resolve issues informally. Speak to HR always if you're not sure. Set agreed, clear, realistic targets. Adopt a problem-solving approach. So, how can we together get through this? And when we're talking about performance, we are here to support that employee to improve their performance, not setting them up to fail. So not setting unrealistic targets, not giving them enough time, not giving them the right training is only going to set them up to fail. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. And I've done it with a bit of time to spare, so I'm very happy about that.
Absolutely. Well done, Sonia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. So I am going to open it up to the floor. Has anybody got any specific questions or just want some additional guidance from Sonia? Now it is time. Please do shout out now.
I'll stop sharing my screen so I can see everybody a bit better.
And I do have a question if people don't.
Okay. I like to be kept on my toes, Sue.
Okay. Oh, so we have one from Jamie here. How long would you usually give someone to improve their performance, or would that be up to you and the employee?
So I think it depends on the situation here. If they're in probation, we could look at extending their probation, but I would only suggest that you extend probation for a maximum of 3 months. And if you are extending a probation, it shouldn't be a shock. No, probation period hasn't been removed. Probation period is something that you can input into your contract of employment. The Employment Rights Bill that was published last week, the Labour government are looking at, I think, 9 months probation, but no, it hasn't been removed. So yeah, you should be using that and enforcing that if you've got that in your contract of employment. So if they're in probation, I think a maximum of 3 months is the absolute we would give somebody, and we would meet with them in that time period. If it's not somebody that's in probation, I think we need to think about what the issue is here. So how much are they underperforming? If it's a small issue, then arguably 6 to 8 weeks to turn something around, really. And as long as that has been communicated to the employee fairly, you are giving them the right level of support and training, everything that you need, and you've got the reviews coming up. Longer than that, sometimes we've seen up to 6 months on these kind of plans. But really, I would follow your capability or performance management policy. It should be in stages. So stage 1 should show you what you do in stage 1, what process you go through and how long you give for improvement, and if there's no improvement, XYZ, how you move along those stages. So I would look at your own performance policy for that. Just seeing something pop up, say, what bill was that?
Yeah.
That was the Employment Rights Bill last week, Thursday, came out about 11 o'clock. We're still looking at that at the moment. There's a lot in there, but it's not until 25 or 2026. So lots of time for, to digest what's going on there, and no changes right now.
Apparently,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
called consultation.
yeah. But so we're looking at a while, but we're pretty certain that most of that is going to get passed.
Brilliant. Anybody else got any questions?
I do. Can I speak?
Yes, of course, please do.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation. Now, one of the factors that you highlighted that could be a reason for poor performance was to do with recruitment. So where the recruitment process probably wasn't good enough, and someone who wasn't quite qualified got recruited into a position. So in that scenario, that's not really the fault of the employee. So how would you then manage that if they're not performing simply because they were not recruited to the right job?
I think you need to ask, so there's two things you need to do. From a strategic perspective, you need to look at your recruitment process, and you need to make sure that it is competency and value based, so that you are recruiting the right people in the future and you're not going to get this issue again. The second thing you need to do is make sure that you are giving the individual everything that they need to meet the expected standards. So if they need more training, if they need more support, if they need a buddy, if they need mentoring, you have to give them everything that they reasonably need to be able to do the job. And if they're not doing it to the required level, then you might need to move to some kind of a dismissal, especially if they're in probation. It would be easier. But one thing I would say is we work with a lot of clients who put a probation clause in their contract, but don't really follow much of a policy around it. We're very clear that, and the probation policies that we specifically write individually for each client has got forms for every process. This is what we're going to discuss in the first stage meeting. This is what we're going to go through second meeting, third meeting, and how we're going to manage them and support them. But that's where we would be having the conversations, identifying what we need to do. So let's say then just not quite getting it. Okay, right, we're going to give you a full week of shadowing a carer, and we want you to come back and tell us what you learned about moving and handling, about this, and then how you're going to implement that in, or the key areas that we need them to improve on. And as long as you're then able to show confidently that you've done everything that you possibly could to get them to where they need to go, but they're not getting there, then you can move to what we would call more of a fair process for a dismissal.
Great advice there, Sonia. Thank you. Yeah, and it is hard. I know that something that really comes up for me quite often is around hearsay as well. When how do you monitor that? What do you say to people if you've heard something about that? How do you address that very specific?
Do you mean if a team member's coming to you and say, okay, I think you need to be open with them and say, what would you like me to do about this? If you're telling me, and you're telling me confidentially, does that mean you do not want to be named? So I think I've spoken to you about this, Sue, before, but we do investigations where sometimes we don't name a witness and we anonymize their statement and their details. That takes a lot of time. And sometimes if their statement is key and they don't wish to be named, it can be very difficult in moving something forward. That being said, I think if someone was to come to me and said, I've seen this, this, and this, I'd say, right, what would you like me to do? How would you like me to deal with this? If they say, oh, I don't want you to do anything, I'm going to say, I don't think that's quite true because you've come to tell me. So I do need to go away and think about how I now have a conversation with this individual without sharing what I'm going to do with the person that's raised it. But I would be asking them for examples. So can you give me some examples? Who else was there? Who else saw this?
Yeah.
So what we are really interested in is when we're looking at this is not just a one-on-one, but, you know, there was 7 other people in that meeting, and speaking to them about what did you see? What did you witness? To understand, okay. And then if you've got a concern, sit in on some of those meetings, you know, those kind of things, to see if you can actually witness the behaviour for yourself.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you so much. So that is the end of time now for this session. So thank you so much, Sonia. And don't forget, everybody, you do have that 1 hour free with HR, Nectar HR. So please do take that offer up. So thank you so much again, Sonia. It's been an absolute pleasure as always, and look forward to speaking to you soon.